Should I change my background?
Well, that's up to you, isn't it?
I suppose that's true. Hard to deny. Hang on a second. Oh, here's a good one.
Sick.
I actually can't believe I had that on file. It was like the first one.
If you're going to have any image on file, surely that's
that's
the one you should have.
What is your image of? I'm assuming that's like a church in England somewhere.
Yeah, it's like a ruined abbey in Yorkshire.
Is that the one from the what's that band? Obsequia? Is it?
No, I don't think there's it, because it's Obsequia specifically influenced by like Iberian music, so I don't think they would have a British. I'm pretty sure not, but I mean, I'd have to look. You know,
that makes sense. How are you, Mark?
You know, I find it increasingly difficult to answer that question. I've never found it easy. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I'm going to mute my self-view so I don't, you know, keep looking at myself.
Is that what happened? Is that what you're doing?
Well, I was doing it. Yeah.
I'm looking at you.
Yeah. Well, that is the. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but that's how conversations used to work. Seems a bit gay, honestly. Now you've mentioned it, but like, why are you, a man, looking at another
man? So, what's been happening since I last spoke to you IRL? Well, sort of IRL.
Sort of semi-IRL. Yeah, because we haven't spoken IRL in years.
It's crazy. Last time I saw you was June 2022. It
was before your child was born.
Yeah,
like way before. Don't think. Yeah. Time flies when you have children.
It's crazy to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. Look, I mean, this is, you know, I don't think we talked about this last time. This is the reason why the podcast has been on like indefinite hiatus. I did say this when we like stopped recording at the beginning of 2021 because I had like my second child.
Yeah, that's right. Now you have.
I have 3 kids at home. I have no time at all. No one seems to understand this issue. I think you do though, because I feel like you, even with your paltry one child, I'm totally overwhelmed.
It's crazy. Like, I genuinely don't understand how you do anything with 3.
What are you doing?
Well, that's right.
You don't. I mean, it's because I like when you just cut back, like, so, you know, I had to cut the pod and I had the second child. Like having one child by comparison it was just, but even having 2 going from 2 to 3, like I used to, for example, take the dog for a walk. Like, I did not have time to do any discretionary activities at all. Zero, literally zero.
Yeah.
I'm either working or I'm looking after children. And the only way I do any third activity is if I bring children with me. Like,
yes. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, I mean, I do have spare time, but I feel that with exercise. If I had a second or third child, that would be gone.
Yeah, and I've been going to see a physiotherapist the last couple of weeks. Who literally has been like, you know, can you take up a hobby? And I'm like, no, this is. And he's like, oh yeah, go swimming. Well, I can't leave the house, go to a swimming pool, and swim. There's no time. I'd have to either, you know, like stop working full time or, like
that's always an option.
Like, or you know, I mean, Jane can take up the slack because she does when I'm working. Like she'll take the kids, but like you know, she's absolutely at the end of her capabilities. Like,
of course.
So, yeah.
Did you notice a significant difference between 2 and 3 in terms of free time?
Yeah, and I didn't really expect it. Like I kind of thought, because by the time we had the third, like the first one was like almost 5, so we had 2.5-year age gaps between each of them. And she doesn't require very much direct attention. Like it's unfortunate. I mean, you want to give her attention, but like, yeah, we kind of thought that would work out, but it's crazy more. And I mean, the baby's like crazy demanding, and also the middle child is way more demanding than the eldest child was when she was that age. So yeah, we just don't, and we also didn't. Yeah, I mean, there's yeah. Look, basically, I always think about this when we had the second one. I talked to a number of people I knew who had two, and I'm you know I remember talking to a woman who said, "Oh, having two is significantly more than double the work." I remember talking to a woman who incredibly claimed that having two was easier than having one because there was a weird economy of scale thing going on. In my experience, is having two is exactly twice as much work as having one, and having three is exactly 50% more. So it's each child is the same amount of work. There's no savings. It's just like I now have three times as much childcare requirements as we did when there was only one, and it is it's mind-boggling. And as I say, people I think who have as many children as me understand. But when I talk to even people I know with one child, present company accepted, James, but yeah, but I got a friend locally who's like, oh, let's go to the park, and I'm just like, no, I'm not. That's not a possibility at all. Like the only way, yeah. And if I would, yeah, go on.
No, but I think there's a one variable here, which is perhaps that also you have three children and you're an academic, which is is just an insane amount of work. And I think when you have two factors here, people don't know how much work three children is, and people don't know how much work being an academic is. I mean, you might say that's your choice and it's a waste of time. That's fair. But nonetheless, if you're doing it, it's insane.
No, this really cuts to the heart of things, because I've really been feeling like I'm burning out this year. This is the first time this has happened since I met you. So when I was at Monash, I felt a little bit that way, 2013.
Yeah.
For other different reasons, but I kind of, and the issue with burnout is just having a bunch of stuff you have to do which you can't do.
Yeah.
And that is my situation now, and particularly it comes from the research side of it.
Absolutely.
There's this. I mean, but it's kind of unbearable being an academic, and it does seem ridiculous to complain about, because on the face of it, our lives are actually quite easy. And people the actual amount of hours you do in the office seems quite easy, and you have these long holidays. But the research expectations, which are objective, because we're in Australia, it's objective metrics, you're required to publish X amount. To do that is just not possible.
No,
for me,
it's an unfathomable amount of work, and of course increasing seemingly every year. The demands or the metrics become either more precise and therefore more demanding, or simply just the quantity becomes more demanding. I'm not really sure, but I think it would differ for each university. But it is, if you want to make, if you're doing original research of any kind, it's over.
I feel there's a serious issue here at a higher level of abstraction, which is what we always do with these things. This is the name of the pod, metacritique, because there's obviously I'm having really particular difficulties with fulfilling the requirements of my job at a very concrete level, because I'm required to do X number of journal articles. I can't do them, and incidentally, those are. I talked before about trying to cut down my work hours. Those requirements are completely independent of that. So if I were to start working part-time, I would still have to publish the same amount, despite not being paid to do any more work. So, but I think there's a bigger burden. I was talking about the general burden of being an academic, which is the kind of requirement to know, which is open-ended. You're supposed to be an expert. The amount of stuff that's constantly coming out, which is relevant. If you're a philosopher, maybe I could unkindly suggest that analytic philosophers rather don't really have to deal with this, because they work in these stupid niches where they just literally read everything in their field. But I don't know if that's true, because I've never been one.
It's hard to say. I think it would be very individual to each person, and also the field. I think I don't think there's one set rule here, but. How much of this, I kind of agree with you, but how much of this kind of impulse to know everything, as it were, around you, how much of this is a genuine need, and how much of it is just a kind of neurotic tendency? I don't mean you, by the way, I mean all of us.
Well, I think, I wrote a book about this.
I've heard of it. I have it on my shelf.
Yeah, but unlike, of course, you haven't read it or anything. I mean, because you don't have
Of course I've
time.
read
It's
it.
exactly the
Of
problem.
course, I've read it.
You read my book.
Of course, I read your book.
Oh, that's right. No, I made you read it. You read it actually before it was published.
Yeah,
Right?
and I'm number one in the acknowledgements. I'd like to
Yeah,
thank
well, there you go.
confirm.
Apparently, I haven't read it.
Yeah.
So I do argue in that book, Normal Now, that there's our society has this peculiar drive to be perfect, capable of accepting any kind of negativity. So everyone has to know everything. I mean, the general injunction in our society for people to know everything, I believe, is satisfied by most people just assume they already know everything. I mean, that's my operational assumption as well. Right, when I go about my daily business, I try not to do this increasingly, but my general habit historically is just to assume I know everything. Everyone else is stupid. I'm a perfect little atom. But then that's I always found it very confronting to deal with the fact that there was all this stuff in philosophy out there that I haven't read that might be important. And my defensive default is to assume that everything I don't know anything about is stupid, like analytic philosophy, for example. It's just castigating, right? But analytic philosophers do this too, very clearly, right? So, but you kind of aggressively assume everything you don't know about is dumb. Whatever level of expertise you're at, you assume you know everything. I'm a little bit in awe, actually, of the number of people I know academically who seem to, with no problem, go out and be reading new stuff and go, oh, I'm very excited to read this new book. And I don't really understand, like every now and again, sometimes I will read a book and be like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like this is, I'm really learning something here. But yeah, that's, I don't know, the idea that what I'm dancing around is like the sheer amount of knowledge production in our society just keeps increasing. The number of books coming out, the number of journal articles coming out. Like if I actually take seriously the idea that there's amazing new knowledge in all these books and journal articles that are coming out, like what the hell are we doing? Like, I'm gonna be able to read a couple every now and again?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right, and I think there's a bit of a dialectic going on here in a sense, because I have to say, and I'm not saying this to be different, but I don't assume I know everything. I really don't. I'm very happy to accept that I know a lot and that I am reasonably intelligent, but I don't think I know everything, and it's actually pretty rare that I would assume I'm the smartest person in the room, I would say. I mean, it has obviously happened before. But that I do suffer a kind of anxiety, a kind of neurotic anxiety about finding stuff out, whether it's about, my research field or whatever. But what I've often found is that anxiety manifests in a kind of very generalized and directionless interest to find stuff out rather than a focused one. So that is to say, if I had spent the last 10 years only, channeling that anxiety into my field, I would be in probably a much better situation than I am now. Whereas actually that drive gets channeled into just a general interest. Like I just end up, reading Wikipedia articles about stuff that has nothing to do with my field. And yeah, I now know a lot of stuff about general information. But actually, what I've realized recently, or at least maybe I've realized the depths of how bad it is. Like this is a complete compulsion, which actually has to stop. Like there is actually nothing to be gained from finding out this information. And there's an economy of this where information just stacks on other information, and there's more and more to be found out, and there's more and more things to discover, or more and more psyops to uncover, or whatever it might be. But there's a few exceptions to this, of course, but actually there's nothing to be gained from this, and you'd actually probably be better off just reading all of Plato and Aristotle again and again and again. I actually do think that's just right.
Yeah. No, it seems right. I mean, I've been having similar thoughts myself. I thought I should clarify with this thing about I assume I know everything. Like the word assume is doing a lot of work there, because it's not that I I explicitly believe or give assent to rationally the view that I know everything.
Right.
That would be crazy, like literally psychotic. It's rather that it's an implicit assumption of a lot of what I do. And obviously this is only in particular areas, like I don't assume this is true of, say, plumbing.
Well, I would hope so.
Yeah. But I assume somehow there's this idea, and it relates to what you were talking about, which is this kind of compulsion to acquire like broad-based general knowledge. But I think this is linked to a positive project, which I'm tempted to call critical theory, which I think in some sense we're both committed to, which is having a theoretization or cognization of the totality.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what professionally, in some sense, I'm trying to do, have been for a long time, is not just develop specialized knowledge in a particular area, but have a grand understanding of what's going on. And if you have that ambition, then you have to have this contextual understanding. I mean, occasionally you can bracket bits off, like I don't really need to know the prehistory of Africa. But anything in European history is clearly relevant.
Yeah.
And so there's rabbit holes, and there's plenty I don't know about it, but like to go down those Wikipedia rabbit holes reading about history, it's very hard to go, oh, that's not directly relevant to stuff I'm saying or thinking or trying to write.
I think I have to qualify what I just said as well, is that actually, like, I'd like to walk back what I said with some caveats. Like, I actually don't think we should only read Plato and Aristotle for the rest of our lives. However, because I agree with you, and I want to kind of make a working distinction here, and I'm not totally happy with it, right? But I think it picks out something reasonably interesting, or at least potentially interesting, which is that, like, these are not like binaries. I think this is like kind of a scale of which we all sit. But I do think that within reason, there's a sort of, there are, within our domain, there are philosophers, and I want to say kind of, quote unquote, true philosophers, which are committed to some kind of an account of the totality. And then I think there are people called, like, what you might call otherwise scholars, right? Which might be philosophically very talented, right? But they are much more focused and on a particular domain, and also, like, their knowledge of the secondary literature is like peerless. Their capacity to synthesize that literature is just like unmatched. And it's not to say that there can't be very important philosophical implications of that scholarship, but they don't have that sort of drive to sort of make or to have an account of that totality. Whether that's fair or not, I don't really know, but I just see it as tendencies in different people. And like, I'm thinking of, like, I'm reading, I think I told you a little while ago, but I'm reading Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, which is like 800 pages. I think he published it when he was in his mid-70s. And it's just like a classic account of, here's a synthesis of basically everything this guy has ever read over the last 60 years, or, 50 years at that point. And he has an account, like a genuine account of, like, how the world works and how it all fits together. And it's completely goated. Like, it's just like, it's unbelievable to see such a sort of all-encompassing, broad account of, how the history of Europe, for want of a better term, came to be, And I think there's something to be said for that. So to qualify what I was saying, although I do think we should read Plato and Aristotle, I also do think that you have to be committed to understanding the world around you. But what I think I was trying to say is that, like, that drive becomes, like, misdirected in my case by just, like, surfing the internet.
I mean, there's a really open question here, though, whether that's true, whether you do have to do this. So, I mean, if you were to just reading Plato and Aristotle would be appropriate if what you were trying to do was not have any kind of historical account.
Right.
You want to have a philosophical understanding, and you don't care about its historicity at all. And I mean, I think, I don't think, I'd be surprised if you could commit to that, because we've lived through historicization of philosophy. So, like, you're immediately going to hit the problem that, maybe in some sense what Plato and Aristotle are saying is not apt to understand the world around us, right? Because it's historically constituted. But I know people who they're scholars, and in areas, so they're working on similar stuff to me, like continental philosophy, but in a scholarly way, and they go out there and this, they're in the library, whatever, they're reading the thing. They're apparently very happy to do this. And this is the point that really confuses me. Like I'm confused at the motivational structure of it, because for me there's a kind of drive to know things, which for me is intimately connected with this attempt to cognize the present. Historically, I mean, when I say historically here, I mean in my past, because honestly, I'm increasingly alien to that drive, which has kind of sustained me a little bit in the past. But I understand that from the inside. Like I want to understand what's, it's the thesis 11 thing, the philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point is to change it. I mean, of course, I'm talking here about interpretation, but there's an idea there implicitly in Marx that because only interpreting the world. Actually, there's a form of interpretation which is necessary as a propedeutic to any historical change. So there's an idea, I need to, this is the a priori of critical theory, to paraphrase Marcuse. We need to understand the world to change it. And historically, in terms of my own past, that's what I've thought. I need to understand what's going on in the world because we need to change the world, and you only understand it, change it through understanding it. And I don't think I could ever have sustained this pure scholarship, like, the pure historical scholarship, like I'm going to be interested in this particular episode. And I'm genuinely confused by the motivational structure of people who do that patient hedgehog scholarship, because, well, in fact, my assumption is when you look at most scholars, actually, I think they are plugged into a kind of grandiose understanding of what they're doing. Like people may be doing something that seems very molecular and academic, but somehow they believe, look, but by understanding the place of women in 17th century English poetry, I am contributing to a greater feminist cause or something like that. And I mean that it's a major reason why the humanities has gone through this inflection, this kind of woke, inverted commas, inflection, because people need now to understand what they're doing in terms of a political purpose. So everything, what you do by that is you have all these bits of, apparently boring scholarship, but it's always got the decolonization or the feminism or what have you tagged onto it, that then make it seem part of a wider purpose. But honestly, I'll be blunt here. I think if you believe that, it's an exercise in self-deception. Because I don't think that is what you're doing.
I think there's a lot going on here, right? Like, I think because part of this is maybe you don't agree, but like part of this is also just a process of the instrumentalization of research, right? Because, if you want to get research funding, you have to claim the most outrageous shit about how it's going to change the world and have, quote unquote, impact beyond the academy, right? And, whatever it is that government policy or, general, whatever the general collective is kind of vibing on, whatever that might be, whether it's progressive politics or a certain brand of progressive politics, or whether it's something else, like it has to be channeled through those mediums, doesn't it?
I think this is wrong, but
Really?
for a very specific reason, because so you going back 15 years and you still see traces of this in the Australian research environment. There was this kind of national interest tests and these quite right-coded requirements.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of go, what I'm doing. And it was kind of ridiculous. Like, people would be doing some very analytic philosophy and they'd have to say it somehow is in Australia's national interest, or, whatever you said. But the bottom line with that stuff is people said it, but they didn't do it anyway. So sure. It's possible to kind of go through the motions with that as well. With if the rubric now is decolonization or marginalized groups, you can say that and then kind of not do it. The reality, though, I think, and I've just written a piece on this. I'm just reading the proofs now that's in the next telos on DEI in the academy. I think the reality is that people, at least a plurality of academics, really believe this. Like they really believe in it with most of their hearts.
See, I genuinely don't know. And I think, I think there has to be a distinction made here. So I mean, partly it's because I don't, where I'm at the moment, I'm not super close to a lot of the feminine academics, so it's hard to know exactly what they think, to be honest. But I mean, surely there has to be and whatever people's personal opinions are or whatever, like surely there has to be made. You might call this leftoid coping, perhaps, but like surely there has to be some kind of distinction made between, like, let's say the original purposes of, let's say, DEI, as it kind of organically emerges as a kind of social phenomenon, which is to say, okay, we want to acknowledge the fact that certain types of people or whatever being underrepresented, and that it seems like it might be a nice thing to try and equalize that somewhat, or at least make sure everyone has the same equality of opportunity, kind of it's fairly standard liberal political philosophy, whatever. Like, so distinction between that and the way that these kinds of processes have been kind of instrumentalized and kind of co-opted by management as a way of with their own distinct goals. And I think it's an open question, like what those goals are. I think it actually depends what institution you're at, to be honest. I don't think you can actually generalize in this case. Is that to me, that's a useful distinction, like, because like there's the well-meaning individuals, and you might disagree with them politically, fine, but then there's the way in which these processes have been co-opted by a managerial administrative class for their own purposes.
But I think what we're dealing with here is a kind of constitutive ambiguity in the concepts involved, which allows them to bridge these different interests. It's one reason that DEI has been so successful as a kind of meme or ideology. So, because you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's very hard to say in the abstract, I don't like diversity, I don't like equity, I don't like inclusion, but these things can mean many different things and cover many different things. So it ties together people with quite different conceptions of them together with an institution that also conceives them differently, that people can appear to be speaking the same language when they speak of different things. But in some sense, I believe there's a commitment to these principles. I mean, the thing that really strikes me, I'm struggling to articulate it, is the unwillingness to attack them, because they're actually, I think they're potentially quite pernicious. And in their ambiguity, I mean, particularly, I think it's about the concept of equity. I think the elevation of the concept of equity to an intangible principle, when this was a concept that it seems to have been invented about 5 years ago to me. I don't know, maybe it's 10 years ago. But it's not part of the vocabulary that I had 10 years ago.
Mm.
And I still don't understand what it means. I mean, I quizzed my students in a class last year about this, like, what do you mean? And all they could do was explain it in terms of this diagram of people standing next to a fence, watching a baseball game.
Yeah.
And I understand the diagram, but what does that actually mean? Like, does it mean equality of outcome? No. Does it mean equality of opportunity? Also no. It's a concept that somehow refers simultaneously to substantive equality and equality of opportunity, but also to neither thing.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, it's a concept that exists principally to allow people to commit to something without committing to anything.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, that's true. But I also think, like, as with all kind of concepts, particularly kind of quite, let's say, at least in this very precise case, quite new concepts, is that they're nebulous and ambiguous. And it's like, actually, like, some people will have a kind of precise account of what these mean, and you can agree or disagree. But the vast majority of people, particularly young people, are actually not going to have any account of what it means. All it's going to do is signify a sort of general account of, equality and not being discriminatory, and, a kind of broad, liberalism or whatever, or progressivism, whatever. But I mean, to me, doesn't this just kind of, and I think I broadly agree with you that, on the one hand, it can sort of mean nothing and everything. and that's true of many things. But I mean, isn't this in many cases, sorry, in many ways, just kind of one of the many symptoms of the kind of, maybe this is a bit dramatic, but, you know, one of the many deaths of contemporary liberalism. And it's kind of allegiance to like materialism and all these kinds of things.
I'm going to circle back before getting to that point to the other stuff you were saying, which, but I think, you know, it's a fair point you raise, and I'm always critical when people demand definitions of things.
Yeah,
because I think it's a shit trick, and for, you know, kind of Wittgensteinian reasons, you know, actually most people successfully use all the concepts they use without being able to supply a definition. This is true. It's true. If I just said equality, right, that's quite ambiguous. But I'm very clear. Like there's a clear conceptual framework that is well worn in political philosophy. That, like, maybe it's just because I'm old that I can't get this. Because I know when we used to talk about substantive equality versus equality of opportunity, I know what these things are. I can talk about rules. I can talk about how he modulates it. We can talk about long debates in political philosophy about this. When we talk about equity, we don't. I mean, that in my vocabulary refers to the actors union in the UK. Like, I don't know what this is when you talk about and why it's needed. What was wrong with equality? Is equality bad? And apparently it is, because equality, people. So, you know, the idea is equality somehow is associated with a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. With okay, which is not either equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. But okay, so they're referring, when they say equality, they mean like equality before the law, like classical liberal equality. Yeah, which already wasn't, that hasn't been, has only been a talking point of the right going back for 50 years. So it's a concept that's come into it where the discourse on equality had already moved well on from that. Like equality was generally being talked about either as some form of equality of opportunity from liberals or as more substantive forms from Marxists. And equity comes into this debate. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, you need to understand it in its correlation with diversity and inclusion, because equity goes through a turn where it's like, okay, we achieve equality through representationalism. I mean, this is my ultimate analysis of what woke is as a phenomenon. It's representationalism, and that's what all this diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. It's about having equality, not through actually, you know, making all the people equal, but by taking representatives of groups and giving them stuff and saying, oh, that's equity. So it's actually, I actually think equity as a concept is a replacement for equality. It's completely shifted the discussion away from equality in a not quite reactionary way, but like in a way that allows institutions like the university, I mean, this is what I'm saying in my article that's coming out next month, but yeah, allows the university to forget about equality, because equality is not something the university can do at all.
Yeah, I think this is an important point, because that's what I was going to say next, is that like what's interesting actually about this is that in some ways, you know, and I say this as a you know,
cis white male,
but also underemployed academic.
Okay, so you do have a diversity card.
I've got a diversity card, but no, I guess what I was going to say is that, like, despite, you know, the all this stuff going on in universities, in some ways the university's never been less equal.
No,
like this is
like our society.
Yeah,
like our society.
That's right. That's right.
No.
That's right. So, but this is why I think. Look, I think I wonder what you just said. I think is really interesting in the sense that, you know, whether it's about representationalism, and I wonder whether that is a kind of an explicit goal, or is it a symptom of the fact that people, for the most, and again, this speaks to the kind of a certain strand of liberalism, or is it that most people that are really pushing this are unable to think of politics outside of a representationalist scheme, right? So that is it kind of organically goes this way because no one else can actually think about politics in any other way other than there being this kind of...
Okay, but how did anyone get to that position, given that I'm pretty sure until about 10 years ago, no one thought of politics like that? Maybe we have to go back a bit further.
I think that's an open question because I think they did.
Maybe 10. Maybe we have to go about 20 years. But I don't remember. I think,
well,
honestly,
how did people think politically before that? That's the question.
Well, there were essentially, if we go back 20 years, maybe we have to go back 25 years. I mean, you know, I'm old.
It's true.
But really, there were kind of three major competing political visions around. There was you know, I'm including the far left one here, even though it wasn't really competitive on the marketplace of ideas after 1990. Anyway, but no, I mean, but obviously I was on the far left, so I believe far left things, which, you know, were like, we need to just smash everything, power structures, inequality.
So true.
So that was, which is, but this communist vision is in a very paradoxical place now, because it still seems to be around. A lot of people still seem to call themselves communist while being aligned with representationalist politics. It's very, very confusing. But that was just not the case. The far left that I was in the 90s and early noughties was allergic to that.
Yeah, of course.
No one was doing so. And then you had the liberal left were equality of opportunity people, right? Going back 25 years ago. And you're absolutely, here we get this genealogy of the left going crazy. Because basically the left said, well, we've dismantled, it's the, you know, we've dismantled things, or we just need to remove these formal barriers. Once women, once minorities are allowed into the institutions, maybe with a little bit of affirmative action to correct some systemic imbalances, then everything will start to work. The problem was that didn't work, right? It didn't. Changing things so that you created equality of opportunity in aggressive ways did not actually deliver equality of outcomes. The liberal left had said against the far left, actually, we can produce equal outcomes by just adjusting the system. This is a kind of Rawlsianism. And this is the kind of social democratic left. And then, of course, there were the right, who were, you know, more or less just equality of, like, formal equality, just let the private sphere handle it kind of people, right? Those are kids. But obviously in the academy, there was the fight was between the far left and the liberal left. The liberal left were firmly in charge. But obviously what happened, again, talk about it in the article, but what essentially happened here is that the liberal left, and you see it in philosophy in a really big way, I think, around the issue of there not being any women in philosophy. And, you know, obviously historically, women didn't have equal access to universities and so on, but philosophers just kind of assumed, well, if we let women have equal access to, women come into university, we'll just end up with like 50% women philosophers or whatever. And this just didn't happen. Like, women didn't enroll in philosophy, they didn't get promoted in philosophy. There was just this absence of women. So then there was the idea, well, we need to systematically reform the entire thing to produce this outcome, which we presuppose is the only outcome that can actually show that we're doing things in an egalitarian way. So this is where equity really comes in, not just in philosophy, but across the board, which is to say, it assumes that equality of outcome is the only possible metric by which you can judge the equality of the system, or equity of the system. And that is going to be judged representationally. So you start saying, well, X number of women, X number of people of color, whatever, that shows that things are working. Because there's an a priori assumption that that's what will happen. And that allows representations to substitute. And that's fantastic, because at that point, you, for the first time, actually have a really clear objective metric that you can say, this is what means things are working, or this is what. But of course, all that leads to people doing is gaming the outcomes. And that's what we've had now for at least 10 years, really, is people artificially creating outcomes without actually creating any system of any equality in the system. Just doing things that show that you get the numbers in the spreadsheet showing you have diversity and inclusion. There's no real diversity or inclusion. There's no real equity.
Yeah. Look, I think I broadly agree with that analysis. I think well, all I would say, and I think there's a material history here somewhere about this idea of what you were saying. It's a while back, so I might be slightly misremembering, but like, this idea of like, quote unquote, the left, right? Which is to say, the hard left, to use your terminology, at a certain point went from kind of being totally suspicious of this kind of stuff to actually co-opting it, which I think is broadly right. And I think slightly unrelated, but I do think that, like, as a general rule, I've thought about this a lot. The shift in let's say, left-wing politics, broadly conceived, from, this is a different point, but I think it's representative of this, of being suspicious of pharmaceutical companies to co-opting their line, is like a huge red flag for lots of reasons, but because it falls into this kind of, if you don't trust the science, quote unquote, then you're a kind of you're a braying right winger. Whereas, of course, the concern was always an economic one, but put that to one side. I wonder, especially with like people my age, give or take. So let's say, going back to, let's say, about when people were kind of politically awakened, let's say 2008, 2009, 2010, around Occupy, where people talk about, the left went from X to Y. And I'm tempted to say, and like, obviously there might be individuals who did that, but I'm tempted to think that a lot of these people were actually just liberals who co-opted certain symbolisms of the further left because of the time in which they were living. And then that quickly fell away, and they might have kept some of those terminologies and symbols. They might have even thought of themselves as socialists or communists, but because so much of their sort of political orientation was opposing the right, or whatever they took to be the right, they fell into these kinds of very kind of sus liberal logics. But I think actually many of them were always just liberals. I don't even mean that as a slur necessarily. I just mean it in the sense that I think I'm more suspicious of this idea that, the far left went from X to Y, rather than actually, like, a lot of people that were actually politically just liberals sort of entered some of those spaces and then either left or stayed within those left spaces without actually any kind of genuine commitments to Marxism.
And this is something that, talking 20 years ago, your average trot, right? Your average member of Socialist Alternative, I think, was actually a liberal. I think you're absolutely right about this. And I think, Trotskyism has a real problem with this in particular. I mean, there's a lot you could say about it I'm not sure what to call it. But as a movement seems to imply it's more cohesive than it is. As a meme. Let's
call it a moment.
I'm not going to call it that, because if it were a moment, it would have been in the 1930s, and it's now over. So like Trotskyism, historically, my analysis of it in the West, because it never takes power anywhere, and all it does, except for Sri Lanka for 5 minutes once, but all it does, it's a pipeline for people to go into NGOs. It's it's kind of somewhere where hyper liberals can go and bloviate about things, and a lot of the discourse they put out is very rights-based. It's liberal discourse, and the Marxism somehow operates as an ideological guarantee, but it's not. Although I've known plenty of people who are Trotskyists who are very into the law when it comes to Marxism, like they really understand Marxism, or there's a lot of people who are Trots who are great professional scholars of Marxism. In terms of the praxis, it's based on this kind of multi-stage, like we're gonna push the agenda of the liberals as far as it can go and show that it's hollow or whatever, but this just seems to go on forever. So from this point of view, I'm agreeing with you.
Two things to say here. I think one is that, because I guess this would be a space that I occupy, for want of a better term, is that it strikes me, and again, that's why I'm just slightly, it's why I try not to refer to like the left or the right in these kind of broad categories, because there's some difficulty in that. Although, it's instructive in certain ways, but I think there is, both IRL and online, there is a strand of, further left politics, call it Marxist, call it communist, that has not taken on, again, for want of a better term, the kind of identity politics stuff, or at least has resisted it as much as possible. That does exist. I'm not saying it's a big movement, but it does exist. That's one thing. Second thing, I'm literally thinking out loud here. It occurred to me just as you were saying it. I wonder, maybe we can stand back a little bit here. And it comes back to this thing I was talking about, the death of liberalism. I wonder whether, in terms of both the left and the right, let's say in terms of like the middle of that spectrum, right? I wonder if both elements have actually lost certain critical elements of liberalism, because it strikes me that, talking about the terms you are with the left, they don't have this account of freedom anymore. That's possibly true. But I wonder whether, and they've retained certain elements and lost others. I think that's actually probably pretty fair. But I wonder if it's the same is also true of certain strands of the right, in the sense that it strikes me, because when you just talked about your absence of interference, I wonder whether what's going on here to some extent is, as liberalism kind of dialectically eats itself, right? Whether some of the confusion and the hostility that's currently we're seeing now is it's a real distortion of of some kind of account of negative freedom, right? So on certain strands of the left, you have, okay, I want to be absence of interference, when what interference means like harm, trauma, these kinds of things. And then on the right, you have speaking, crudely, but, don't interfere with me. Like, let me do what I want to do.
Right? So, yeah, I think there's another thing to say there. So I'm going to take it back to the beginning of this beyond left and right idea, right? So I think it's pretty clear currently that politics is polarized.
Sure.
That there are two ecosystems, and I think it's pretty clear one is right and one is left. I actually don't think there's very much doubt about it. And actually the thing that occurred to me though, is to think, because what is the origin of the left-right distinction? Well, it's the French Revolution. Well, actually, the contemporary left, I don't think they're liberals, but they certainly are Jacobins. Like, contemporary leftism is very reminiscent of the left of the French Revolution, which was, liberal in a sense, because they believed in the rights of man, and there was a conception of negative liberty in there, and there was a conception of. So they were liberal in a sense contemporary left isn't actually, but the contemporary left is neo-Jacobin because of its I'm taking that phrase is one I heard from Peter Osborne, if anyone knows, former editor of Radical Philosophy. But yeah, they're neo-Jacobin in the sense that their vitriol towards their enemies is so hyperbolic. And I think in terms of where liberalism is now, I think it's on the right. But it's not to say the right now is generally liberal. I think it would be absolutely correct to say, just to not say the word right more times than a sentence. It's a correct analysis, very, very obvious to anyone, I think. Anyone who denies this has got their head in the sand, that there are strong, explicitly fascist tendencies now in the right-wing discourse.
Absolutely.
They've kind of always been around, but they're there. So there's the right-wing ecosystem simultaneously has people who have very libertarian, like explicitly libertarian. So obviously libertarianism, right-wing libertarianism is clearly a kind of dumbed down version of classical liberalism. Yep. Like hyperbolic, stupid version that throws the baby out with the bathwater. But yeah, but libertarians are around, and they're in the same spaces with people who are fascists, and they're united by their opposition to the left. And the spread of liberal values on the right is very uneven now, because but that is where the liberal values are. Like, if you're into free speech now, you're a right winger. That's considered to be a form of reactionary position. And the turn here that happened, I think, actually, I'm increasingly convinced of this, looking at the situation in the UK, where you have a lawyer as the prime minister. It's through critical legal theory. So this which ultimately does originate in Marxism in a way, but the attempt to somehow throw out liberal presuppositions in the law in favor of, I don't know what, like positive discrimination. That's where the contemporary left really comes from. So yeah, it's really, I think it's abandoned the liberalism. Like it's still focused on the law and rights, but trying to use those to get things that it wants, which kind of come out of Marxism maybe, but they're in this representationalist version, so they're not really trying to seize the means of production. They're just trying to ensure, I don't know what, like a bunch of really abstract things that they've decided to use as substitutes of that, right? So rather than, you know, liberate the proletariat, it's like, no, we're going to ensure that people don't have psychological harm inflicted on them. And the reason that is the new goal is because that was something you could litigate within a capitalist system.
Yeah. No, again, I'm happy to sort of accept that broad diagnosis in some ways, but I guess I'm trying to harp on about this, but when you say they, who are you talking about?
Who's I'm sorry for my imprecise pronoun use, because everyone is now they. But
they then confirmed.
Yeah. But
like when you're talking about the left, like who do you actually have in mind in a material sense?
Well, I honestly think it's nebulous, but it involves everyone from a lot of Marxists, and the shibboleths are really clear, because you do have anti-Interpol Marxists, but they're a minority. You know, so there are Marxists who are willing to not cuck to the you know, left shibboleths on these questions. People who, you know, now start describing themselves as post-left or whatever. But the majority of Marxists absolutely double down on contemporary gender politics, etc. Right? So that I think this is absolutely reality. Most Marxists today, whether they're Trots, Marxist Leninists, are, you know, absolutely convinced that the standard shibboleths, which aren't just theirs, but the shibboleths they share with HR departments about gender, race, all that stuff, that's a unifying, that DEI ideology,
yeah,
unites everyone from every HR department in a major corporation, through every major political party, well, except the kind of right populist ones, so potentially not including the American Republican Party, as it's now been reshaped, but yeah, through to the much of the far left.
Yeah, okay. So I think this is the crucial hinge, because I know that I understand that this is the kind of, again, speaking broadly here, and you know, with acknowledgement of what I literally just said 5 minutes ago, but like I understand that this is kind of like the right-wing narrative, right? Which is to say that basically a certain significant portion of the political spectrum, going from sort of the center, let's say the middle center right, all the way to the left, has like basically accepted the terms that, you know, HR and these kinds of people have given us, or they're now working in tandem, and you know, and again, I think there's streaks of this, and there are strands of this that are true, but I think I actually think I just disagree in the sense that, and maybe this is just, you'll think this is coping, but like I think it's a genuinely open question. Like I think it's an important question, but I think I just don't see. So, for example, the people that, like, I'm speaking anecdotally here, like people that I see and know and these kinds of things. The people that are on the same board, or sorry, so on the same page rather, as, let's say, HR, right, in terms of their sort of very strict instrumentalized policies of this and that, of inclusion and these kinds of things, are not Marxists, like of any stripe.
No, I'm not saying that.
Right, no. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, I don't think on the left, I don't think the allegiance with management or whatever is as cohesive as is being claimed. Like, I'm not for a minute denying that there are like people who are completely on board with that. They absolutely are. And people that should know better, like 100% should know better and should have the analysis to know that these people are not your friends. But I don't think it's a cohesive whole. I just think
I think you're strawmanning here. So, but it's a question whether you're strawmanning. I mean, because obviously I'm being sensitive here, because I think maybe you're strawmanning me. But maybe you're just trying to straw man the right, which I should be less.
No, I'm not.
But I think,
well,
obviously not consciously trying to straw man anyone. But the right wing discourse here. I mean, I do have, have really significant problems with it. My main complaint about it, I'm typically arguing with people online, is that the right referring to this stuff as Marxist. But this is just the genetic fallacy, because they can correctly point out, like I was just doing critical legal theory, there's a series of steps where people who were authentically Marxists laid groundwork, which through a series of steps came to lay the foundations of this stuff. And from this point of view, I don't think anyone is claiming, I mean, maybe someone is, but this what you just kind of suggested when you were laying this out, that like the HR doctrines have come to be believed by the far left. If anything, it's the opposite. It's that the far left doctrines have come to be believed by HR. But the reality is somewhere these doctrines really come about more in the middle ground. Where these, I mean, actually, I think where these doctrines really came, the kind of DEI discourse is really an invention of people who were schooled in quite complicated stuff. People who've been reading critical legal theory, they've read Judith Butler in university, but they half understood it, and then they take this platitudinous version of it, and that's what becomes the actual dominant discourse. Sure. But the question really is whether you line up with it. And this is a point on which I think, the right are correct, in a sense that, and this goes back to your thing about talking about people being liberals. There's this logic that Marxists have that we need to take, there's a strategic logic, we need to be in this particular position because, and it's kind of thinking these like, trying to play this 4D chess down the road, because they believe, if Marxists believe as an article of faith, that we are inevitably, as a result of the progress of history, heading towards a proletarian revolution, therefore, and we go, okay, we need the bourgeois revolution first, so this is left liberalism, we're going to line up with it, we push it as far as it can go, eventually we'll actually get communism. But this is rather than actually ask what is happening in reality right now. So that's my problem with Marxists, and it's why I'm not a Marxist, why I stopped being a Marxist, more than a decade ago, and why I think Marxists just get sucked into this stuff, because Marxism literally says you should line up with the bourgeoisie against reactionaries. And it's then alloyed to this kind of constant repetition, this trauma response that the left has to what happened in whatever it is, the third period of the Communist International or Comintern. What is it that where Stalin said that the communists couldn't have any alliance with social democrats, and that allowed the rise of Hitler. There's this trauma response on the left where they think the rise of Hitler occurred because the Communist Party in Germany refused to ally to stop the fascists with the social democrats, because Stalin said the social democrats were also fascists, and as a result of that allowed Hitler. So now whenever anything that looks like it might in any way be fascism comes along, the left has to respond by allying with anyone who is opposed to that, who's even slightly on the left. And so most Marxists now, as a result of that 1930s experience, have as an article of faith that they have to be, if there's any kind of threat from the right, in a strategic alliance with the soft left. Consequently, it's actually a conscious process lining up with this stuff, even if in some sense they don't believe it.
I mean, taking it from a slightly different angle, I'm sort of stepping back here a little bit, because I think there's lots of things, like there's a lot of intricacies here that I think that are basically right, and we could quibble over the details. But I think to go back to what you just said, talking about what's actually happening right now, like on the ground, right? And I take it that this is at least, the motivation of many people on the left, at least, is that what I'm interested in, and I'm with you in a general sense, that like I have a lot of skepticism about how, let's say, to use my terminology, like broadly well-intentioned desires of equality or liberation come to be instrumentalized by managers and administrators and capital in general. Like I'm just as skeptical of that as many people, I would say. But I think what I'm interested in, and I'm even happy to accept we might disagree on the details, but I'm even happy to accept that a lot of these kinds of processes are actually pernicious. Like I'm even happy to accept that within certain parameters. But I think the other thing is like what I'm interested in is like, and we might even say like, yeah, it's bad, right? But why is it that DEI as a general phenomenon is this focus of such, let's say, worry? Whereas what I look at is like, look at how, in terms of our historical moment, what we're looking at is, after COVID, one of, if not the greatest wealth transfer ever, in terms of forms of, wealth accumulation, asset accumulation, these kinds of things, the hollowing out of working class, middle class, that to me is what I'm more worried about that. Like and I'm not saying you're not. I'm not saying you're not, but like, I guess I'm happy to look at something like DEI and kind of associated things and go, yeah, it's like kind of dumb.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I mean, admittedly, this is cracking already in America, right? Because we now have this virulently anti-DEI government, national government.
Yeah.
So the breaking point I think has been reached there, but up till now, this reflex, and again, it's something you see a lot on the left, which is like, why are you worried about this, bro? This doesn't matter. Like, I don't want. Okay, the reason to worry about it is that functionally, and this is still the case in Australia or the UK, where DEI discourse is hegemonic. Australia, but this is, I don't know, but until prior to last year, the DEI discourse was the ideological discourse which was masking inequalities and growing inequalities in capitalism.
Yeah.
Precisely through a redirection towards other. What's important is not, don't worry, because the DEI discourse effectively in the hands of HR is like, well, don't worry about how much money the CEO's making. Worry about whether there are enough women of color on the board, right? So so from that point of view, this is the argument I make in the article, which is DEI has to be smashed precisely because it's the thing that is preventing you going to deal with their real problems.
In which case, I'm like 100% on board. Like I should say, I'm not saying don't worry about it. I think what I'm saying is that like what I think, at least to come back to what you were saying before, like on the right there are now much more explicit fascist and libertarian tendencies now, right? And like I totally buy the fact that DEI is a kind of psyop to actually undermine genuine equality, whatever. But like there are also people, right, who want to undo DEI because they just like don't want people that are not like them, as it were, in the workplace, right? So like that's all. Like it's got to come from you've got to come at this from like sort of multiple angles, as it were, rather than just say DEI is bad. Right? You've got to have like the account you just gave then is good because it goes, what's actually happening is it's like under the guise of growing equality and inclusion, you actually have, as we just said, growing inequality. Like if that's the claim, then but the problem is a lot of also people just like want to see a return to a kind of more homogenous workplace.
This is right. This is again where my analysis goes. I'm afraid I'm just rehashing this article really in real time here, but because the question is whether there's another discourse that can serve the same function. Because what the right are completely naive about this. The right either have very implausible, the kind of online rightoids they want to have medieval Catholicism be our contemporary discourse, or they want to have Nazism, or they want to have. But these are all like very niche things, and they don't have that kind of purchase that DEI does. They're not going to do the substitution. The kind of more center right position, I think that most actual conservative politicians have, they kind of just imagine they don't need ideology. They're basically, they just want to kind of get rid of all this ideological stuff and go back to, kind of basic equality of opportunity kind of stuff, like, equal access, civil rights discourse. But the thing is that already failed. So but this is precisely why I think it, in a certain sense, is progressive to attack DEI, because there's not another waiting ideology in the wings for contemporary neoliberal capitalism. It's not clear what it's almost like the last chance. My suspicion is, but you can't predict it, right? Maybe some other ideology will appear, but without that, I'm not sure there is anything there to prevent a serious reckoning with the inequality, with the substantive inequality.
So are you a progressive now again, Mark?
No.
Interesting.
No, because I say this stuff merely as I mean, in principle, this is just analysis for me. This is just analytically true. It's not.
We're just talking.
Yeah. So like, but yeah, I mean, there's a real question. This goes back to this question: knowledge, what we're doing. Like, because I'm still addicted to this idea that I need to have, you know, by reading all of Wikipedia, I need to have like an understanding of the totality. Because of like political stakes, but actually, although I'm constantly writing about politics, and I'm like, you know, a news junkie like you are, like this, but I just think this stuff is awful. I think, and this goes back to your Plato Aristotle point, like it's horrible, and it also this is part of the same ideological effect in a kind of horrible way. Like you know, concern, being preoccupied with the news, culture war, all this stuff, and I don't think it's a psyop. I'm not concerned about it because it's part of what the regime wants for us to be obsessed with the news. It's because it's just a dead end, and it's totally pernicious, and it's also because of this terrible illusion we all have cultivated in this, because we live in a democracy that we're all little political actors who can do something and not spectators.
I do genuinely think, and in fact, this speaks to what we're talking about now. Like and this is really getting to the a traditional Metacritic take, which is that I do genuinely think at this point, and I think it's actually much more true than when we were saying it in 2021, is that no one has any idea what's going on. And I think like, and I think that we're at a, you know, it speaks to, again, what we were just talking about. I think there's a genuine ambivalence. There's a genuine like material shift in like historical circumstances. And I think really people don't know where this is going to land. And it, you know, it might be the rest of our lifetimes for this to actually like to sort of become clearer. But things are, and I don't mean anything beyond this, and other than what I'm saying, like things are really up in the air, both like in concrete terms, but also in sort of ideological terms.
I mean, isn't that always true?
Well, that's another question. Maybe that is always true, but it seems more true now than it used to. But maybe that's just me being naive.
I actually think it's an important point, partly because I keep being tempted to go, look, we're just, you know, caught in techno acceleration now. Because my temptation with stuff is to go, this is all bullshit anyway, because actually what's happening is AI, and that's who, you know, all this discussion, culture war, it's just a total sideshow. But actually, I don't think we do know that either.
No, I think it's up for grabs. I don't know.
Well, I think it's really empirically unclear whether, because accelerationism, it has a normative component, but it's primarily empirical. It's like, yes, technological acceleration is unstoppable, Moore's law. We're going to get the singularity. Actually, we don't know that's true.
No, you don't. And so much of this too is also tied to just like inflating stock prices. Like you talk a big game. You talk a big game in order to inflate your stock price. Like it's all bullshit.
Yeah, I think Tyler Austin Harper, is that his name? Yeah, I mean, you're not on Twitter.
No.
He writes for The Atlantic now. He's an interesting guy because he was a philosophy professor who's just quit to become a staff writer at The Atlantic. But he was saying something like this.
Yeah.
Like in the Atlantic. So,
well, I mean, because it's now the model for, I mean, Tesla did it. It's now the model for all of these big companies. Like they just like talk nonsense to.
It's funny though, because I think Musk is not, as far as I can tell, like maybe I'm insufficiently cynical about Musk, but actually, as far as I can tell, he's doing this stuff because he believes the ideology of accelerationism in some sense. It's not because he's a pure yarn.
Oh yeah. No.
He actually hasn't done this cynically to make money. He really thinks we're going to Mars, and that's all he cares about is going to Mars.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I was talking more general terms in like, this is how you have a company now. You make shit up so that you inflate the stock price. Like I'm talking about, I'm speaking.
Well, the AI companies, yeah.
Yeah, I'm speaking specifically of like what Trump was doing kind of like 10 years ago, not so much now. But like, yeah, I mean, the LLM stuff, like, yeah, it's very impressive and very like narrow parameters. But like, so I had an experience last week where I was talking to a friend of mine about, you know, writing for a living, writing historical novels for a living. And he was like, "Oh, just get ChatGPT to do a hornblower like series." And he goes, "I'll get it." And he goes, "Look, give me a second. I'll get it to do a 5-book synopsis rundown of like what it's going to look like." And he says he gave certain parameters. I want to travel to the Spice Islands. Blah blah blah. Anyway, the outline was fine. Like it was fairly impressive. But then he actually asked the book to write the book, right? And it just got, after a few thousand words, it just got less and less impressive, right? And that's just, again, it's anecdotal. But
yeah, but do you actually read books like that? Because I mean, my thought is, like I wouldn't read a novel written by ChatGPT, or if I did, I assume it'd be terrible. But like, I also don't read novels written by human beings.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so you're still reading lit.
Yeah, I'm lit pilled.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, like, again, this is, I don't know when that disappeared from my order of priorities, but a long time ago.
But I just think, I mean, just broadly speaking, like I think that it's a genuinely open question, and I oscillate myself between like full doomerism and actually like, no, this is actually total nonsense. Like this is a total dead end.
It's difficult because the problem with AI or LLMs, or the reason it's a serious problem, is that so much of what human beings were doing was bullshit. And this is my suspicion with the lit stuff as well, particularly the kind of lit that's like widely read, like YA fiction or the kind of like romance. Like it's very hard for me to not believe that LLMs could do a competent job on that, because I think what people do is so bad. So
absolutely.
That's why, I mean,
this just speaks to a mode of production, right? Like, it comes back to what we were talking about originally. Like, everyone has to just endlessly produce now, and most of it's crap. Yeah. No one has that many good ideas in them. I'm sorry, they just don't. And so,
well, but who's required to have good ideas? It's like a part of their portfolio, like job.
Like, I have no doubt that within 5-10 years that there'll be AI generated as an industry, and maybe it already exists, but like romantasy stuff, YA stuff, because that
it must already exist.
Yeah, because I mean, but that stuff is just like, it's dime a dozen. Like it's literally just repetition, and that's actually what the audience wants.
Yeah, well, that's right, because being derivative is something
that's part of the trope. That's part of the genre. The genre itself is derivative. So that's one thing entirely.
But that's a very always has been thing.
Absolutely. Like as far as I'm concerned, like these kinds of writers were basically just LLMs themselves.
Yeah, but then where does that leave us? Because it means that LLMs aren't part of it. So accelerationism isn't true, but like on the other hand, the LLMs are still like an apocalyptic invention, or that maybe they're not, because I mean, what are we saving? We're saving horrible, like, millions of people working shit white collar jobs. But then if we don't have a left-wing version of accelerationism that will do the luxury space communism and use the LLMs to liberate us from work, then we'll just be impoverished.
Yeah, that's the real problem. Is that like they'll use it to eliminate a quarter or a third of all jobs that are fake, which they are.
Yeah,
but there'll be nothing to replace it. But that's
see, this is really interesting though, because I think the extent to which those jobs are fake, it's not clear to me that you couldn't have eliminated those jobs already.
See, that's what I don't know. Like it's
like I had this incredible, not quite red pill moment, blue pill moment maybe, when I was like, I was at Sydney Uni on campus, like you're talking maybe 15 years ago, and they had like a young woman who was like working in like the unions, the university union, not the trade union, the student union, like bookshop. And there was zero customers. No one was coming in and buying anything. So it's a pure sinecure, like it's supported through union fees. And I was just like, I thought, because people criticize socialism, they talk about the free rider problem and they say it's inefficient. In the Soviet Union, loads of people worked, but they didn't have anything to do. It's just totally inefficient. But actually, and admittedly, it's not, this particular instance isn't a very good case, because you could say, oh, that's like that kind of island of socialism or something in a market economy. But actually, I think the market economy is full of this. It's full of these jobs. So people are underemployed, or they're paid they're doing something that doesn't really need to be done. Corporations are monstrously inefficient. They make money principally through market unit capture. They have quasi monopolies, economies of scale. So there's tons of jobs out there that could be eliminated in public and private sector, and that's always been the case. But we think LLM is going to somehow push it over the edge. Because why? You need someone to put in the prompts and send you the emails that have been generated by now them. So what's the difference? How do we actually get rid of these jobs?
I guess the difference would be, I mean, I genuinely don't know, but I guess the difference would be that you just need far fewer people to do that.
Yeah, but we don't. But this is my point. Like, you know, if you're a corporation, you need to make a profit. That's it. There's no requirement to. I mean, maybe I don't want to accuse Marx of thinking of being this naive, but like there's a kind of naivety if you think it's a kind of naivety of the left if you start thinking that like neoclassical economics does, that everything's like, you know, that capitalism is like, you know, rational utility maximizing. Like, it's not true that market mechanisms automatically produce the leanest and most efficient system. It's an evolutionary system where, like, if a corporation is surviving, it will continue to survive as long as it doesn't do things that cause it to collapse. Then it can keep plodding on, and that's all that's required. So, and these corporations are already viable. So, okay, at a certain point, maybe a particular CEO is going to go, oh, here's some savings that will impress the investors. But as you know, in university, I think it's the same in a private corporation. I mean, obviously, corporations aren't private, but you know what I mean? Like in a private sector corporation, like the CEO has to show, they have to dazzle people enough. They have to go, well, I've done this. But you don't really, like, yes, that has to involve something that's going to positively influence the stock price, but you don't have to, like, cut it to the bone, eliminate everything. The impetus to do that is like,
no, I think that's right. Like, I think that I don't think it's going to be we wake up tomorrow and all the jobs are gone. But I do think, like, I mean, if you look at the, you know, the history of the Industrial Revolution, and, you know, I mean, to talk about Marx, actually, his whole point of what his claim is that, you know, it's actually what the mechanization of these forms of labor actually, like, yes, on the one hand, it sort of gets rid of certain jobs, but actually, as a general trend, it actually increases the work you have to do, right? And I take it that this is, and I wonder if it's about jobs per se, or like the quality of your job, right? So it's like, actually what's going to be, whereas your job might have been, you know, semi-bullshit, but actually had some interesting elements to it. Whereas in 10, 15 years time, now it's literally just like, yeah, you're just doing prompts so you'll still be employed, right? But it'll be totally unskilled in a particular sense, and it'll be incredibly boring and repetitive. I'm more tempted to, I mean, again, I don't know, but I'm more tempted to say that is, I think there'll be jobs lost in certain specific sectors, but I think a lot of it is going to be just like prodding LLMs.
Yeah, that sounds both bleak and because bleak, to be completely correct. Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be everyone's jobless. It's going to be that your job sucks even more.
The thought I have from Marx about this is what this does to the rate of profit, though, because that's I think Marx's big hope with this is like, oh, rate of profit's going to fall because you can't keep it, because, you know, you have this problem of, I mean, you pay people less money because you know, the machines are doing more work, they can't afford things. But I feel like this problem has effectively already, I don't know. I mean, it's a big debate, right, in Marxist economics and
but again, I think genuinely people don't know. I think, but to return to your original question, which is like, you know, corporations aren't lean machines, which is completely right. But I also think it takes people, because these are big behemoths that, you know, they turn real slow. I actually think it takes people a bit of time to sort of come to terms with like what the technological change implies. I don't know, but I think it's still an open question as to whether suddenly a lot of corporations are going to go, actually, we can ditch, you know, a quarter of the workforce or whatever, and why not? And that might take 10 years to do, but there'll be a sort of organic shift.